Hi, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Delighted on this episode to be talking. It seems like we were just talking like moments ago,
It's weird.
but I know. Talking with author Rachel Bateman. Rachel, thank you for jumping in. Thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me and inviting me on the show.
Absolutely. We'll dispense with the prolegomena about how many of the guests do comics and things like that. I want to get right to make the Fireflies dance. Oh, I should have
Oh,
one, two, three.
oh,
There it is.
our
Yeah,
timing was off, but we've
that's
got
right.
it.
That's right. So delighted to share about this book and love the weaving together of several things that are at work here. One of those being the family story, the family dynamic that supports part of the narrative, the story of a character who is sort of this aspiring filmmaker, love film, and I'm not always a romance reader, but the romance angle worked well in the book, and all of those things came together really nicely. So,
Thank you.
um, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So we could talk more about the book in a short while. But I typically like to ask, and again, I think it's the English teacher in me that is always curious, what's led you to this world of creating and what connects you to the written word?
Um, Without trying to take up too much time because I tend to be wordy, um, like a lot of authors, I wrote when I was a kid. Like my first book was basically fan fiction of the 1988 version of The Blob. I watched it when I was way too young. I was like 7, and I wrote my own fanfic, like walking around my backyard. But then as I got older, I was super into the sciences. My high school years and my college years were all about science. Um, and then I went to massage therapy school, and right at the end, right before I started my career, I destroyed my shoulder and had to have it reconstructed.
Mm,
And when I was like doped up on all the medication, all the drugs afterwards, I couldn't sleep. So I took my sister's computer because I didn't have one and just started writing. Um, and it was terrible because I was on so many drugs, but it reminded me how much I loved it. And it
mhm,
just kind of
mhm.
snowballed from there. And and pretty soon I was writing my own books.
I love it. I love a rust to roses, ashes to light sort of story of something that could have been a major setback but that has led you on this path. Love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love the path I'm on. So while I didn't like doing the surgery and I really didn't like paying for the surgery, I'm glad it happened.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and now you have a book, a couple of books, right,
Mhm.
that
Yep.
are out into the world, that have been part of this. So trusting the mystery and going with the
Yes,
journey. Um,
exactly.
so what is it like? I hesitate to pigeonhole books and say it's a young adult book, it's a middle grade book, it's a this book, it's a that book, because I know so many adults who read widely.
Mhm.
I know young people who read well beyond when publishers sort of say you're supposed to read this book. So what's it like to craft for, I'll say, a broad audience?
Um, so I was that young adult who never read young adult, partly because the category hadn't exploded the way
Mhm.
it did yet. There were very few there, but I went from like chapter books to Stephen King. Like that was my trajectory. And then it was also shortly after that surgery, my sister got me some books. She worked at a bookstore and brought them for me, and a couple of them were young adult novels. And I was just like, this is amazing. Like the freshness and the newness, and even in really gritty stories, the optimism that you can still have when you
Mhm.
have the whole world in front of you is really exciting. I just really love that space where everything can be new and exciting, and you're experiencing so many firsts in life still.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so I just kind of fell in love with that world.
Yeah, the review on the cover says a wonderful feel-good novel of delirious first kisses. So when
Yes.
you mentioned the first, that just made me think of that immediately.
Yep. A lot of first kisses in this one,
Yes,
weirdly.
it works. It works. Um, Yeah. So I've said a little bit about the book, and as I mentioned, I'm not a spoiler kind of person. I don't share too much about books. But anything as far as the way the book has come together that you'd like to share about. And then I also wanted to ask you about the dedication, if it's okay to talk about that. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
because I'm always curious. Um, about it says the best backroads companion I could have asked for while plotting this book, even if you did sleep the entire time. I love you, Rooster. So
Yes.
I'm guessing you have a pet rooster, is what I'm guessing.
I do. I actually have several roosters. This one, however, is my 6-year-old son,
Oh,
um,
love it, love it.
who we called him Rooster since he was born, for no real reason. I did learn when he was 5 when he said something that he didn't know his real middle name because he legitimately thought it was Rooster. So we had to correct that. But just to give the kind of the background of where this came from, um, and it also kind of encompasses an explanation of how it ended without telling you how it ends. No spoilers.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm,
I right when Someone Else's Summer came out, which was my book before this,
mhm.
I had Holden, my 6-year-old, 3 months before it came out. And that is Rooster. And I was pregnant with him while I was doing edits on that book, and it was really hard, and I couldn't create anything new that whole time. And I talked to some other author friends of mine who are also mothers, and they said, this is totally normal. Like, I couldn't write when I was pregnant either, because I wasn't trying to write when I was pregnant with my first. So I never experienced that. And they said, when you have him, it'll be fine. It'll come back. So I was like, okay, I can ride this out. And then he was born and it didn't come back. And it didn't come back. And it didn't come back for like 2.5 years. I just struggled starting. And I mean, I'm a writing coach. Like, and like my whole shtick isn't like coaching the craft, but coaching people with imposter syndrome and getting out of their own way. And here I was like, it was years, and I couldn't get through that block. And then one day, shortly after he turned 2, I was driving to pick up my other kid at school, and for some reason, I started thinking about this short story I read like 15 years ago when I was in college called The Kiss by Anton Chekhov.
Mhm,
And Make the Fireflies Dance is a modern reimagining of The Kiss. And the reason I was thinking about it is because I read it 15 years previous, and the ending made me so mad and so dissatisfied that I was like, I need to tell this differently, but I need to honor what actually happened in that story too. And I know some people are unhappy about a certain aspect of the ending of Make the Fireflies Dance. Um, and that is what I kept true to
mhm.
The Kiss. But I tried to have a more fulfilling journey for the main character than I felt like I got in that story. And I recognize how arrogant it sounds to be like, I'm gonna do better than Anton Chekhov, but I had a lot more room. His was a short story. I had
Mhm, mhm,
80,000 words. I had a lot more room.
mhm.
So that's how it happened. As far as the dedication, when I am figuring out a book, I just drive the back roads. I live in the middle of Montana. There's a lot of back roads, a lot of places to go. And about the time he started to want to stop napping, and I was like, you can't make it to the end of the day without a nap, but you won't do it. I would put him in the car every day and drive because he would sleep in the car. And so we put miles and miles and miles on driving these back roads while I had like a voice recorder and I would talk into it to tell myself this story, and
Oh,
he would
wow.
just sleep. So I like to tell him he both broke me and fixed me when it came to writing. Like I lost it when he showed up, but he helped me bring it back because this book really brought it back. So
There are so many things about that story that I love. For one thing, it's a very unique process kind of story because I've not talked with anyone on the show, and I've done almost 300 of these, I think, at this point, like 280 something.
you've
I've
really
not had
been going with this. That's awesome.
I try. I try. I don't have like a middle setting. I'm either all in or not.
I feel that.
But I've not had anyone talk about sort of the back roads going out, driving and thinking experience and tape recording and talking through that. So that is fascinating. I also love what you said there about reimagining Chekhov because I love it when authors do that. I had a middle school student ask me recently, how do you write something that's completely new? And
You
I
don't.
exactly. Yeah.
You never do.
Yeah, my response was, well, you think of something, you read, you start with characters, but you can also take stories in new directions, or as you're saying there with Chekhov, taking it in a fuller direction uh, and exploring it further. And even in if you and I were to write a book about our day, I don't know that anyone would look at it and go, well, no one's ever thought of that before. Really? You took your dog to the vet? Wow. But you know that's part of what's meaningful to us. So I actually really appreciate the idea of visiting an author like Chekhov, and not necessarily saying I can do it better, although
Right.
you could debate that. You know, but saying, hey, here's this inspiration that I've now taken in a new direction. Was it enriching for you as a writing coach to go through that experience?
Absolutely. I actually used to coach much more on the craft. And
Hmm.
after going through that, I realized you like people learn craft. They learn it in middle school, they learn it in high school, they learn it in their entry-level college course that they have to take to get any major. And there's a million resources online if you don't know where your comma goes, or
Hmm.
if you don't. But when I found that most writers who thought they were having a craft issue, they don't know how to do this. They don't know how to structure chapters and stuff so they could have 70,000 words. The
Hmm.
issue was never actually with the craft. It was with whatever narrative they had in their head that was putting up a roadblock and keeping them scared, even if they didn't realize that was fear. And that really helped me recognize that the mindset and the confidence and working through that is so much more important to figuring out how to write a book than any kind of craft on writing a book.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Love that. And the human experience of writing, it's part of why I enjoy being a reader and hopefully part of the joy of writing as well.
Yeah, it is.
So what is it that you hope readers take away? I know there's not one thing, um, but if you were to say, gosh, I hope readers notice this or think about this, what might
Um,
that be?
it's funny. It's the same for every book I write. And it took me until I wrote and published three novels and have written multiple screenplays to realize I do this. I have an underlying theme in everything, and that is that grief and joy can coexist in the same space.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, you can have such lightness and joy even when there's something very hard going on. And sometimes it's not lightness and joy. Sometimes that grief takes over, that hard part takes over, but that's not permanent. And so, like the coexistence of those, I've found that kind of threads through all of my writing, even if I don't try for it. Um, it was intentional in this book, and that's what kind of woke me up to the fact that I'm always doing it anyway.
Hmm.
So,
Love that. Yeah, I love that. And going back again to what we've said about literature, if you want the grieving side of grieving, I mean we've got Goethe. There's always Goethe. You can check that out. But the layers and the nuances that you bring and to explore that with young characters who are, as you said, experiencing so many things for the first time, I think adds that much more power to that question too.
it was it was very interesting to do. I wrote the book having never lost a parent. And here's this main character who's dealing with that as a teenager who's getting ready to finish high school and embark on her life. But in between when I wrote it and when I finished edits, my stepdad died.
Mm,
And,
mm,
I'm much older, I'm more, it's a different situation, but it's like I could edit it from that lens of okay, I've lost a parent now and I know some of these things and what would that have and that helped with figuring out that nuance.
yeah, yeah. Um, so I have one more official question, and then we can talk about anything that we've missed. And that is the part of the episode where you get to talk about where to find the book, where to find you online, events, works in progress, all of those sort of things that are sort of the next steps segment of the episode.
Okay, so I am recently really embracing the fact that I'm just like unapologetically multi-passionate.
Mhm,
So anytime
mhm.
someone asks me this, I'm like, okay, are you ready? Because I'm going to say a lot right now.
I
Um,
love it. I love it. I
but,
love range. I
but
love hearing about all kinds of stories. So
nice.
yes,
As for
ready.
finding the book, it is available basically anywhere books are sold. If it's not in the store, they can order it. But the big ones, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, all those. Um, as where you can find me. My website is rachelbateman.com. I keep it nice and easy.
Love
And
it.
I'm on Instagram at Rachel Bateman Books. I'm technically on other social media, but I try not to actually be on it because then I wouldn't write. So Instagram is kind of my thing. Um, as far as what's coming next, okay. I do I do have another young adult book that is with my agent currently, preparing to send on to my publisher in hopes that they want it. That's
Ready.
something a lot of people don't know about writing. It's like even once you're established, I have two books under my belt with this publisher, but that's not a guarantee. And a lot of people don't realize that. Um, but it's one that's very dear to my heart. So if they don't want it, I will shop it around elsewhere and potentially self-publish it because I just love it.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but beyond that, I am branching into like adult women's fiction. So kind of the same vibe of what I write in young adult, just with older characters,
Hmm.
um, and trying to let those older characters still have adventures. Because I didn't write it for a long time. Because every time I tried to write like a middle-aged woman, I'm like, man, our lives are boring. Um, then I was like, maybe if I had more excitement in my life, it'd be easier. So I forced myself to like say yes to things and try new things. And I'm branching into that space. Um, and then the final, kind of not actually the final, but the final that I will talk about here. The final new thing that I'm doing, I'm really, really excited about, is I am actually right now preparing and recording to launch my own podcast.
Love it. Love it.
Uh,
You
and
already have the headset. The headset is
I
key.
do, I do, I do. I actually have like a standalone mic on the way too, because I actually stole this from my 12-year-old
I love it.
because my dad gave him like a super nice headset for Christmas. I'm like, but I need to use that sometimes.
Oh
um,
yeah. Oh yeah,
uh,
definitely.
but yeah, it's going to be a podcast, basically what I do in my coaching, a way to reach more people because I can only directly coach so many people. But that whole getting out of your own way, tackling imposter syndrome,
Hmm.
and really rewriting the myths that you've embraced like as a writer, because there are so many myths around writing, like you have to write
Oh
every
yeah.
single day. Like so many people teach that like that's the gospel truth, and it's not. And like if it works for you, great, but if it doesn't, I know so many people who quit because they're like, well, I can't do what they say to do and it doesn't work for me, and so they just quit. So it's
Oh.
really about rewriting those stories so you can do the best work you can. Um, and then also because I am multi-passionate about balancing that, it's really geared toward other writers who are like, I write, but I have all these other things and I want to do them, but they take time away from my writing. Like finding a way to exist in a world that really, really focuses on being a specialist in whatever you do instead
Mhm.
of doing multiple things. So I figure out how to hone that pitch for a podcast in so it doesn't take 2 full minutes.
I love it. Love it though. Love it. Yeah. Writing across the modes, writing across the methods. I don't know. I don't know. I'll think on that though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
do that because the name is something I'm still going back and forth on. So I don't have it set.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, always glad to talk podcasting things. Um,
Excellent.
yeah, yeah, that's very exciting. And you said you'd also done film and screenplays as well.
Yes, I have written several. I actually wrote screenplays, really, really bad screenplays, like embarrassingly bad, before I ever wrote novels. And then when I started writing novels, and I struggled so hard for so long to structure a novel so it didn't get boring, to keep it going. And it took an embarrassing amount of time to be like, what if I approach this the way I would approach screenwriting? And so I did, and that's when it finally like clicked for me. And it's just been in the last couple of years I decided, you know what, I'm going to go back to that and write screenplays again. So I've written a slasher that I am just madly in love with. And actually, last November for NaNoWriMo, I wrote the novel version of that slasher.
Oh, love it.
Which actually I sent the screenplay to a contact, and I copied my agent on it because she likes to be in the know. And she just replied with, I'd like to see how this looks as a novel. And I was like, done. That's all the encouragement I need. Done. so, so I did it. But the reality is like it's so off brand from where I already am. Like that won't stop me from doing anything with it. But it's like we need to think about how we're going to approach this because it's very different. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I have a ton of fun with it. I always tell people I write romance and horror. Like people are either kissing or dying. Like that's what I've got.
I love it. I love it. Very, very extreme, but also very relatable emotions. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And I've heard so many people come on and talk about, well, I want to do this or I've done this, but I have this particular brand or this sort of,
Yeah.
or people have published and they're going, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And I'm going, I love to see people explore range and,
Yes.
you know, yeah, shout
That's
out
that's the
to,
thing. It's really easy to let what you've already written pigeonhole you into what you're going to write.
Mhm.
Because you do have an established brand, and it's easier to find your readers if you stay within that brand. And like I get all that strategically, but it's really hard to to I'm trying to figure out how to word this. People like me, I'm not saying everyone's like this, don't want to do that always.
Mhm,
Like
mhm.
I want to explore other things. So it's just a matter of like, okay, we can do this. Let's just figure out the best way to do this. So it's not just like throwing spaghetti at a wall. Um,
Right.
but you were going to give a shout out to someone and then I totally talked right over you. So,
Oh no, no, you're good. You're good. I was just gonna say Stephen King and the Bachman books. You
oh,
know, that's like
yes.
classic,
Yep.
like expanding range right there. And
And
when
then
you
as
don't
he
want to,
got so popular, he could just do Stephen King and it doesn't matter if he's writing hard horror or fantasy or like Joyland was this like wonderful coming of age with a little bit of ghostly stuff in the background, but mostly it
hmm
was coming of age. Like he can write all over the place. I really love because you see this in the indie world a lot because I'm hybrid. My first book was self-published. You see in the
hmm
indie world a lot. You really, really need to have a strong niche. And if you're going to break off from that, have a different pen name. And
hmm
and it's like I get that from like a marketing sense, but that just sounds exhausting. To
Right.
like I know authors who run 4 or 5 pen names so they could, and it's like that just sounds exhausting to me. And good for you if you can do it. But I look at authors like Denise Grover Swank, who is an indie author who writes in a wide variety of genres, and she does really well in it. And she has done a good job. Like I can read one of her books, regardless of genre, and feel her in the book. Like it's
hmm
definitely a Denise book. And I think that that's how you do it. That's how you branch out. Like I said, I wrote this slasher and it is gory and it is intense and it has a lot of language, which my young adult books do not have, but it still very much has my voice. And it's in, third person, which my
hmm
young adults are all in first. Like it's very
hmm
different, but it still has my voice. And I feel like that's how you can branch across different genres because your voice is so uniquely yours.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I know you probably talked about this in craft too, but voice is one of those things that is not something that you notice in everybody's work. It's
No.
not something that's easy to come by and develop because there's so much authenticity that goes into it. And there's so many layers of that imposter syndrome that are like, no, oh, think of this person. Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's something I hear a lot. Like I feel like my writing isn't elegant enough or it's not intelligent enough, or I'm writing, and Neil Gaiman, he just sounds so magical. Even when he's not writing magical stuff, he just sounds so magical. And it's like, that's just Neil Gaiman. You listen to the man talk and he sounds
Right.
magical. He's like, everything about his practice is so romantic, and like that is very much, and you would never mistake a Neil Gaiman book for someone else. Like, it's just who
Hmm.
he is.
Hmm.
Um, but I think where people don't find their own voice is when they are just starting to figure out who they are as a writer, and then they look at someone whose voice they admire, and they're like, well, this person is so elegant and mine is not. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, for one, more practice is what it takes to get there, but also you don't have to be elegant. You just have to have your authentic point of view and the way you write, and that comes with practice and
And
doing
not
it.
a, oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, not all readers want elegant
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
elegant all
I'll,
the time.
yeah. Some readers, like, they you get in the horror book groups, and there are die-hard readers who like to like punch you in the face pulpy horror. There's
Mhm.
nothing elegant about it. But there's also readers in that group who really like the, like, Jennifer McMahon, the slower, more atmospheric horror that is horror but still very elegant. Like, there's readers for everything. Some people, when they get really elegant prose, will get bored. And um and some people don't like Neil Gaiman's voice. That's weird to me, but there are people who are like, I
Yeah.
just can't do it. I can't get into it. Um,
I'm not one of
so
those people. I really, yeah. I
I do too.
play Neil Gaiman in my classroom. I'm like, enjoy
Yes.
this.
Yes,
Um,
I am also a lover of his voice, both his spoken word voice and his writing voice. Um,
yeah,
but there are people who don't. I've talked to people who, like, I tried multiple of his books and I just can't do it.
yeah,
And it just shows that, like, there is room for
yeah,
everyone. And if you just keep going until you develop something you like, not that you think is what other people will like, you'll get there.
yeah, yeah. Thinking about Elmore Leonard, if you're going to go with someone who's not elegant, and not to say that's not a put down in any way, but for someone who's just like terse prose, Hemingway
Yes.
style, crime based, when the character says something, they say. There are no, fancy verbs for say. They just said it,
Yeah. They've
and
just
then
done it.
they said something else. That's totally fine too. And there are those days where that hits just right. So,
I mean, we were talking about Stephen King earlier, and Stephen King, Tommy Knockers is probably a bad example because he was on so many drugs when he wrote that. He said it was like he doesn't remember, right. But there's like half a page about all the foods that make this guy fart.
right.
And people love Stephen King. Like, you can't get much less elegant
True.
than
True.
that. Um,
But as a challenge, I think it would be great in a workshop or something to say, can you write about this elegantly? That would
fair
be
enough.
that would be a challenge.
That would be a good challenge. Um, but yeah, he's often not elegant, but he's a
Mhm.
phenomenal writer, and he
Mhm.
knows how to grab a reader and keep them. Um, and that's not always with elegance. And really, if you look at many books that are hugely popular, you can say the same thing, um, which is not bashing on those books. Like, a lot of people like make it sport to bash on Stephanie Meyer and Twilight.
Right.
I don't care how they're written, which are not super elegant. I mean, she's one of those rare overnight successes who that was like, she started doing it. They're not super elegant, but people loved them because she was able to make people care. And that worked.
I'm also one of those people who really appreciates her book, little known book. I think it's little known. The Chemist. Really enjoyed The
Me too.
Chemist.
I
Yeah.
feel like it just like came out and no one ever
Hmm.
talked about it. It went totally under the radar. I listened to it on audio and I thought it was delightful.
My wife and I both read it and we were like, this is great. And then we never heard anything else about it,
Yeah.
because there were no vampires or
Yeah. I think it
alien
was
hosts or anything.
really, yeah, I think it was hard for her after having, not single-handedly, but had a huge part in exploding the YA category. It was
Mhm.
hard for her to move out of the YA category,
Yeah,
um, which is unfortunate because The Chemist was fabulous, I thought.
it's very
And
well
also
done.
it moved out of that paranormal space too, which like
Mhm.
it was a big leap, and I wish it got more love because um I think even the people that are really anti-Twilight, I think there's stuff there for them to like in The Chemist.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, and with some streaming network, I don't know who's doing it, but once the writer's strike and the actors strike are um,
Oh no.
settled in some way, I hope, um, then there's supposed to be the Twilight series, TV series, and so I'm hoping that Stephanie Meyer gets some nice
Oh, I had not seen
attention.
that.
Yes, yeah. Everything that came out 10 years ago is
Yeah.
now being revamped. They have Harry Potter, Hunger
That's
Games.
yeah,
It's like
that
10
is
years
true.
ago. And this is part of getting older too. But hopefully Stephanie Meyer will have the chance to explore and do some things there as well. But
Yeah.
we have traveled far. We have danced away from. I'm going to hold it up one more time. Do you want to see if we can synchronize
Oh,
our books?
yeah, let me see which side I'm going to put this on here.
Okay.
Where am I? Okay.
Ready?
Yep. Here we go.
There it is.
Ta-da.
Oh, and
Oh,
it disappeared for me.
yours
But there it is.
disappears.
Yes.
Mine
So
won't
yeah.
focus because it just wants my face. There we go.
Speaking of books, have you read Make the Fireflies Dance? Have you read that
Weirdly,
one?
I've read it a few times.
Yes, yeah. So recommending that book, and it is going in my classroom library and sharing it with folks and sharing it with my wife as well. And
Wonderful. Thank you.
yeah, absolutely. And I'll link the website, which should be popping up again about right now in the video somewhere. And yeah, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I had a ton of fun.
Same, same.